The Flying Zippo, Japan's deadly gamble. Clark Air Base sits baking under the Philippine sun on January 31st, 1945. Major Frank T. McCoy approaches an aircraft that will change everything American intelligence thinks they know about Japanese aviation. His camera shakes slightly as he frames the shot. Before him rests tail number 760 Threatwelve, a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, completely intact and utterly abandoned. The fuselage gleams like polished silver, nearly 20 meters of cylindrical perfection sitting on tricycle landing gear. Wings stretch 25 meters tip to tip, pristine and undamaged. The twin radial engines, each pumping out 1,500 horsepower from 14 cylinders, look ready to roar to life. This isn't wreckage salvaged from some jungle crash site. This is an operational bomber, left behind by retreating Japanese forces. McCoy climbs through the wing inspection panels. What he finds inside stops him cold. The fuel tanks sit completely naked. No self-sealing rubber, no armor plating, no fire suppression systems, nothing. Just thin aluminum skin, maybe 2 millimeters thick, separating thousands of liters of high-octane aviation fuel from the outside world, from enemy bullets, from fire. He's examined dozens of crashed Japanese aircraft across the Pacific, but this moment is different. This pristine bomber, abandoned intact during the American liberation, exposes a design philosophy so alien, so incomprehensible to Western military thinking, that it will take months for analysts to process the implications. Every assumption about enemy capabilities is about to be demolished. Every belief about what Japanese engineers would sacrifice for performance is about to be shattered. Every notion about how imperial forces valued crew survival is about to be systematically destroyed by the evidence contained within this single, perfect example of Japan's most important bomber. The story really begins 4 years earlier. December 8, 1941. Smoke still rises from Pearl Harbor when 82 G4M bombers and 26 G3M bombers lift off from Formosan bases. Their target, Clark Field itself, America's primary air base in the Philippines. The attack achieves complete tactical surprise. The Japanese formation arrives at 12:35 in the afternoon, flying at 20,000 feet, far beyond the reach of American anti-aircraft guns. 27 bombers from the initial wave drop 636 bombs across Clark Field's runways and facilities. Then Zero fighters sweep in at treetop level, machine guns blazing, destroying every aircraft that survived the bombing run. Of 17 B-17 flying fortresses on the ground, 12 are obliterated. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk fighter is reduced to burning wreckage. In 45 minutes, American air power in the Philippines ceases to exist. Lieutenant James Harrington watches from a bomb shelter as the Japanese formation withdraws northward. He later writes in his combat report about what struck him most: the perfect formation. The high altitude, totally beyond American reach. Then the fighters dropping down to tear them apart. They couldn't get a single plane airborne. The Betty bombers themselves departed untouched. The few American fighters that managed to scramble arrived too late, finding only empty sky. The Japanese have demonstrated something terrifying. Their bombers struck from bases 460 miles away, a feat no American bomber can match at this stage of the war. The Betty's first year of combat proves devastatingly effective. December 10, 1941. Just 2 days after the Clark Field raid, 26 G4M bombers join older G3M Nell bombers in attacking Force Z, a British naval task force built around the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battle cruiser HMS Repulse. The attack begins at approximately 12:20 in the afternoon. Japanese bombers approach in coordinated waves, their torpedo runs executed with precision that stuns British observers. Each Betty carries a Type 91 aerial torpedo weighing 840 kilograms with a 205-kilogram warhead, specifically designed for shallow water operations. The torpedo attacks focus on the two capital ships with devastating accuracy. Prince of Wales, a battleship displacing 43,000 tons and representing the newest generation of British naval power, takes at least 6 torpedo hits plus damage from level bombers. Underwater explosions rip massive holes in the ship's hull. Flooding overwhelms damage control efforts. The battleship lists severely. Repulse, a battle cruiser built during World War I but modernized in the 1930s, absorbs at least 4 torpedo hits while attempting evasive maneuvers. The ship's anti-aircraft fire claims several Japanese aircraft, but cannot prevent the coordinated torpedo runs from finding their targets. The cumulative damage proves fatal. Both capital ships capsized and sank within hours. Prince of Wales goes down at approximately 13:20 hours. Repulse follows at approximately 13:33 hours. 841 British sailors die. The engagement lasts less than 2 hours from first contact to final sinking. For the first time in naval history, capital ships actively defending themselves have been sunk solely by air power while in the open sea. The G-4M Betty bomber has achieved what naval theorists debated for decades. British naval superiority in Asian waters has been shattered in 90 minutes. Across the Pacific theater through early 1942, American and Allied pilots encounter Betty bombers in every major engagement. The aircraft seems to operate with impunity, striking targets at ranges that defy conventional understanding. They hit Darwin, Australia from bases 1,500 miles away, demonstrating reach exceeding any Allied bomber's capability. They attack Port Moresby from airfields across New Guinea's mountain ranges. They strike Guadalcanal from Rabaul, a distance exceeding 600 miles, projecting Japanese air power across vast ocean expanses. The Betty's operational range gives Japanese forces strategic flexibility that Allied commanders struggle to counter. American fighters based at forward positions lack the range to intercept Betty bombers departing from distant bases. Allied airfields come under attack from Japanese bases that are themselves beyond Allied striking range. The asymmetry in bomber capability means Japanese forces can attack at will, while Allied forces struggle to retaliate effectively. This advantage persists through the first 6 months of war. Betty bombers participate in virtually every Japanese offensive operation across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. They strike targets in the Philippines, Malaya, the Netherlands East Indies, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. They support naval operations throughout the theater. They perform reconnaissance missions exceeding the range of any Allied aircraft. The Betty becomes the symbol of Japanese air power's reach and effectiveness. But the advantage depends entirely on limited Allied fighter opposition. When Betty formations can strike without interception, when they can approach targets at high altitude beyond anti-aircraft range, when they can deliver weapons and depart before fighters arrive, the aircraft proves devastatingly effective. These conditions characterize operations during the first half of 1942, when Allied air strength remains limited and dispersed. By mid-1942, the tactical picture begins to change. As American fighter strength increases, as Wildcats give way to more capable Hellcats and Corsairs, as pilot training improves and tactical doctrine evolves, Betty crews begin reporting disturbing losses. The shift becomes undeniable on August 8, 1942. 23 G-4M bombers from the 4th Air Group depart Rabaul to attack American positions at Guadalcanal. American fighters intercept the formation over Tsevo Island. In the engagement that follows, 18 of the 23 Betty bombers are shot down. Approximately 120 aviators die in what becomes the single worst G-4M loss during the entire campaign. Fighter pilots report the same observation across every engagement. The Betty explodes into flames with minimal hits. 2 or 3 rounds anywhere along the fuselage or wings produce catastrophic results. The aircraft earns grim nicknames that spread rapidly through American squadrons. Flying Cigar, One-Shot Lighter, Flying Zippo, all references to the Betty's terrifying tendency to bloom into fire from battle damage. By October 1942, when Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn arrives at Guadalcanal commanding VF-17 Flying F-4U Corsairs, the Betty's reputation has transformed completely. He later reports that the first time they caught a Betty formation, they couldn't believe how easily they went down. Hit them anywhere along the fuselage or wings, and they'd explode. They actively hunted them, recognizing them as among the most vulnerable targets in Pacific skies. But the true extent of the Betty's vulnerability, the engineering decisions that made such catastrophic losses inevitable, would not be fully understood until American forces began capturing intact examples for detailed examination. November 1942. Australian forces overrun Japanese airfields at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Among the abandoned aircraft, technical air intelligence units discover Betty bombers with varying levels of damage. Initial examinations confirm what pilots have been reporting. The fuel tanks have no protection whatsoever. Aeronautical engineers with the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit, Southwest Pacific, conduct the first detailed analysis. Wing access panels reveal fuel cells with no protective measures. Thin aluminum construction, no rubber sealant layer, no protective coating, no fire suppression systems. Multiple Betty bombers examined at Buna show identical characteristics. This isn't battle damage or field modification. This is standard Japanese design. The implications are staggering. American bombers by 1942 universally feature self-sealing fuel tanks. The B-17 Flying Fortress incorporated them from the B-17C model onward. The B-24 Liberator featured them from the XB-24B prototype. Even fighter aircraft like the P-38 and P-47 feature protected fuel systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks use layered rubber compound that swells on contact with fuel. When punctured by bullets or shell fragments, the rubber seals holes, preventing fuel loss and fire. The technology adds substantial weight to aircraft, but dramatically improves crew survival rates. American military doctrine considers this weight penalty essential and non-negotiable. Yet here stands Japan's primary land-based bomber, produced in thousands, operating across the entire Pacific theater, with fuel tanks offering zero protection. The weight saved by eliminating self-sealing systems, armor plating, and fire suppression equipment is immediately apparent. But the cost in crew lives is becoming equally obvious in loss statistics that mount with every engagement. The captured Betty at Clark Field in January 1945 provides the most complete technical analysis. Major McCoy and his team spend 3 weeks dismantling and documenting every system. Their report, classified secret and distributed to all Allied air forces, details specifications that explain both the Betty's extraordinary capabilities and its catastrophic vulnerabilities. The G4M Model 1 specifications reveal an aircraft optimized ruthlessly for range and speed. Empty weight of 6,741 kilograms, remarkably light for a bomber of its size. Maximum takeoff weight of 9,500 kilograms. Fuel capacity of 4,780 liters distributed across 8 unprotected tanks, 4 in each wing, positioned in the wing's center section, where they're most vulnerable to combat damage. Top speed of 428 kilometers per hour, approximately 265 miles per hour. Maximum range of 6,034 kilometers, exceeding 3,700 miles. Service ceiling of 8,500 meters. Crew complement of 7 members including pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, and 2 gunners. The fuel system design is particularly revealing. The 8 tanks are arranged in 4 groups of 2, positioned along the wing's longitudinal axis where the wing joins the fuselage. This placement maximizes fuel capacity by utilizing the thickest portion of the wing structure, but it also positions the tanks directly in the path of enemy fire during combat. Any attack from the side or below will inevitably strike fuel tanks. The aluminum construction provides no protection. The absence of self-sealing compounds means even small punctures will leak fuel continuously. American engineers calculate that the weight saved by eliminating protection systems exceeds 500 kilograms per aircraft. This weight savings translates directly into additional fuel capacity and extended range, but the cost in vulnerability is equally calculable. Combat reports show that Betty bombers, hit anywhere in the wing area, explode with near certainty. The unprotected tanks create what engineers term a critical failure point. a single system whose destruction guarantees loss of the entire aircraft. These numbers tell the story of design choices made in September 1937, when the Japanese Navy issued requirements that would define the G4M's entire existence. Top speed of 398 kilometers per hour. Cruising altitude of 3,000 meters. Range of 4,722 kilometers unloaded or 3,700 kilometers, carrying 800 kilograms of bombs or torpedoes. The requirements reflect Japanese naval strategy in the late 1930s. Japan's empire stretches across vast Pacific distances. Naval bases are separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean. The Navy needs bombers capable of striking enemy positions far beyond the range of carrier aircraft, bombers that can operate from land bases to support naval operations across the entire theater. Existing Japanese bombers fall far short of these requirements. The G-3M Nell bomber, then in service, has a maximum range of approximately 3,000 kilometers. American bombers like the B-17 have even more limited range in their early variants. No bomber in service anywhere in the world in 1937 can strike targets at the distances Japanese planners envision. The Navy's requirements aren't arbitrary. They're calculated based on the distances Japanese forces will need to cover in any future Pacific conflict. From Formosa to the Philippines, 460 miles. From Rabaul to Guadalcanal, 600 miles. From Japanese home islands to potential targets across the Pacific, thousands of miles. The bomber that can meet these requirements will give Japan strategic reach that no other nation possesses. But the requirements also reflect assumptions about future warfare that will prove catastrophically wrong. Japanese planners assume that surprise and initiative will provide protection for long-range bombers. They assume enemy fighter opposition will be limited by range and numbers. They assume the war will be decided quickly before enemy industrial capacity can generate overwhelming force. Every assumption will prove false. The man tasked with achieving the impossible is Kairo Honjo, who leads the Mitsubishi design team after taking over from Joji Hattori. Honjo studied bomber design at Junkers in Germany during the early 1930s, absorbing European aeronautical engineering principles and manufacturing techniques before returning to Japan. He understands immediately that meeting the Navy's requirements will demand compromises that Western air forces would never accept. Honjo assembles a team of engineers at Mitsubishi's Nagoya facilities to tackle the design challenges. The team analyzes every aspect of bomber design, calculating weight budgets for every component and system. They study existing bombers from multiple nations, identifying where weight can be reduced without compromising structural integrity. They experiment with new construction techniques and materials that might offer weight savings. The mathematics are brutally simple. To achieve the required range, the aircraft needs massive fuel capacity. Each liter of aviation fuel weighs approximately 0.8 kilograms. 4,780 liters of fuel means approximately 3,800 kilograms of fuel weight at full load. To achieve the required speed with this fuel load, the aircraft needs minimal weight. Every kilogram added to the empty weight reduces either range or payload capacity. These two requirements exist in direct opposition. Fuel is heavy. Protection systems are heavy. Armor plating weighing hundreds of kilograms would be required to protect crew positions and vital systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks add substantial weight through the rubber compounds and additional structure required. Fire suppression systems add weight. Redundant safety measures add weight. The cumulative weight of adequate protection would prevent achieving the required performance. Honjo makes the decision that will define the G4M throughout its service life. Protection will be sacrificed for performance. The fuel tanks will be unprotected aluminum construction. No self-sealing compounds. No armor plating around fuel cells. No fire suppression systems beyond basic fire extinguishers. No redundant safety measures. Every kilogram saved will be invested in fuel capacity, range, and achieving the Navy's performance specifications. The decision isn't made lightly. Honjo understands the risks. His team calculates the vulnerabilities that unprotected fuel tanks will create. They know that combat damage to the wings will likely prove catastrophic, But they also know that the Navy's requirements cannot be met any other way with available technology. The choice is between an aircraft that meets performance specifications with known vulnerabilities or an aircraft that fails to meet requirements but offers better protection. The Navy has demanded performance. Hangzhou delivers performance. The first G4M prototype flies on October 23, 1939. The aircraft meets every performance requirement the Navy specified. Speed exceeds expectations. Range surpasses projections. Payload capacity satisfies operational needs. The bomber enters production as the Navy Type 1 attack bomber, with Mitsubishi building the aircraft at plants in Nagoya. Initial production models, designated G4M Model 1, begin reaching operational units in April 1941. By December 1941, approximately 180 G4MS are in service with the Japanese Navy. These aircraft will form the backbone of Japanese land-based air power throughout the Pacific War. The Betty's combat debut at Clark Field and against Force Z demonstrates the wisdom of Hangzhou's design priorities in the specific conditions of early 1942. When facing limited opposition, when achieving surprise, when operating beyond the range of enemy fighters, the Betty is devastatingly effective. Its range allows strikes from bases that enemies consider safe. Its speed permits rapid penetration of target areas. Its payload delivers meaningful damage. But these advantages depend entirely on the assumption that Betty formations will face minimal opposition. The moment American fighter strength increases, the moment interception becomes routine, the moment sustained combat becomes inevitable, every design choice that prioritized range over protection becomes a death sentence for crews. The Guadalcanal campaign exposes the fundamental flaw in the Betty's design philosophy. From August through October 1942, more than 100 G4M bombers are lost with their crews in what becomes sustained bloodletting that Japanese air forces cannot sustain. The single mission on August 8 alone destroys 18 of 23 aircraft with approximately 120 aviators killed. The pattern repeats with brutal consistency throughout the campaign. Betty formations depart from Rabaul, fly 600 miles to Guadalcanal, engage American fighters, and suffer catastrophic losses. August 9th sees additional bombers lost. August 10th brings more losses. By the end of August, the 4th Air Group has been effectively destroyed as an operational unit. September brings no respite. Betty formations continue striking American positions at Guadalcanal, and American fighters continue destroying them in overwhelming numbers. The mathematics are inexorable. Japanese forces need to strike American positions to contest control of the island. Betty bombers provide the only means of delivering meaningful strike capability from Rabaul, but every mission results in losses that cannot be replaced. October sees the pattern continue. American fighter strength increases as more squadrons arrive at Henderson Field. Pilot quality improves as combat experience accumulates. Tactical doctrine evolves to exploit Betty vulnerabilities more effectively. Japanese losses accelerate even as the number of bombers available for missions declines. By November, when the Guadalcanal campaign effectively ends with Japanese withdrawal, Betty losses exceed 100 aircraft. Crew casualties approach 700 men dead. The exchange rate is unsustainable. Japan's most capable land-based bomber has been rendered obsolete by its own vulnerabilities, transformed from a feared weapon into what American pilots call easy meat. Japanese planners expected losses. All military operations involve casualties, but the scale of Betty losses exceeds every projection. The unprotected fuel tanks that permitted 6,000-kilometer range also guarantee that any hit to wings or fuselage will likely prove fatal. There's no middle ground, no wounded bombers limping home, no damaged but survivable aircraft. Betty bombers either return untouched or explode in flames. By mid-1943, Japanese engineers recognized that modifications are essential. Starting with the 663rd aircraft produced in March 1943, 30mm rubber sheets are installed beneath wing surfaces where fuel tanks are located. These sheets aren't true self-sealing tanks. They're a compromise measure, adding minimal weight while providing limited protection against fuel leakage. The modification reduces top speed by 9 kilometers per hour. Maximum range decreases by 315 kilometers, but crew survival rates show no significant improvement. The rubber sheets can slow fuel leakage from small caliber hits. They cannot prevent fires from larger caliber rounds or cannon shells. They cannot stop explosions when tracers ignite fuel vapor. The fundamental vulnerability remains unchanged. Japanese designers attempt more comprehensive protection with the G4M Model 3, introduced in October 1944. This variant features actual self-sealing fuel tanks with capacity reduced to 4,490 liters to accommodate the leak-blocking material. The modification reduces maximum range to 3,640 kilometers, a loss of more than 2,000 kilometers compared to the original G4M Model 1. Approximately 60 G4M Model 3 aircraft are produced by war's end. The modification comes too late and in too limited numbers to affect the Betty's combat record. By late 1944, American air superiority is so complete that no level of fuel tank protection would permit Betty bombers to operate effectively. The war's outcome has already been determined. The Betty's vulnerability becomes so notorious that American forces begin using the aircraft in ways that highlight the dangers Japanese crews face. April 18, 1943. The Betty bomber becomes the instrument of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death in an engagement that demonstrates both American signals intelligence capabilities and the aircraft's fatal weaknesses. American codebreakers intercept Japanese communications, indicating that Yamamoto will fly from Rabaul to Bougainville on April 18th. The admiral will travel aboard a G4M bomber with a fighter escort. 18 P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron are assigned to intercept the flight, though only 16 actually fly the mission after one aircraft blows a tire on takeoff and another suffers drop tank failures. The mission requires extraordinary precision. The P-38s will fly over 400 miles at wavetop height to avoid radar detection, navigate across open ocean without landmarks, and arrive at exactly the calculated intercept point at exactly the calculated time. Any error in navigation, any deviation in timing will result in mission failure. The intercept must occur within a narrow window when Yamamoto's aircraft will be vulnerable. The P-38s depart Guadalcanal at 07:25 hours. They fly at 50 feet above the ocean for over 400 miles, maintaining strict radio silence. Navigation is by dead reckoning and timing. The formation arrives at the calculated intercept point with precision that will become legendary in aviation history. At 09:34 hours, exactly on schedule and exactly 1 minute ahead of the calculated intercept time, the P-38s spot Yamamoto's formation. 2 Betty bombers flying at low altitude with 60 fighters as escort. Captain Thomas Lanphier and First Lieutenant Rex Barber break from the formation to engage the bombers, while other P-38s hold off the 0 fighters. Barber engages the lead Betty bomber, which carries Admiral Yamamoto. The bomber takes hits to the wing area where the unprotected fuel tanks are located. The aircraft explodes in flames and crashes in the jungle. Yamamoto's body is recovered the following day. He had been killed by injuries sustained during the crash. The second Betty bomber also crashes, killing all aboard. The operation demonstrates multiple aspects of Allied superiority. American signals intelligence had intercepted and decoded Japanese communications. American planning had calculated intercept timing with 1-minute precision over 400 miles of ocean. American fighters had executed the mission flawlessly despite extraordinary navigation challenges, and the Betty bombers' vulnerabilities had guaranteed that successful interception would be fatal. There was no possibility of Yamamoto's bomber surviving once it came under attack. The unprotected fuel tanks ensured that any damage would be catastrophic. The Betty's vulnerability reaches its most dramatic demonstration on March 21, 1945. 18 G4M bombers take off from Kanoya Air Base. each carrying an MXY-7 Oka rocket bomb beneath its fuselage. The Oka is a piloted, rocket-powered aircraft with a 1,200-kilogram warhead designed for kamikaze attacks against American ships. The mission requires the Betty bombers to fly within 20 kilometers of their targets before releasing the Oka aircraft. The Oka pilot would then ignite the rocket motor and dive at speeds exceeding 650 kilometers per hour toward American ships. The warhead's 1,200 kilograms of explosives would destroy any vessel it struck. But the mission depends entirely on the Betty bombers surviving long enough to reach release range. The formation departs Kanoya at approximately 14:30 hours. The 18 G-4M bombers fly in tight formation with fighter escort, heading toward American naval forces off Okinawa. Each bomber carries an Oka weapon beneath its fuselage, adding substantial weight and drag that reduces speed and maneuverability. The bombers are even more vulnerable than usual, unable to evade or maneuver effectively while carrying the Oka loads. American radar detects the formation at approximately 100 miles distance. F-6F Hellcat fighters from USS Hornet are scrambled to intercept. The Hellcats reach the Japanese formation well before it approaches release range for the Oka weapons. In the engagement that follows, American fighters systematically destroy the entire formation. The Betty bombers, already vulnerable under normal circumstances, prove completely helpless while carrying Oka weapons. The additional weight prevents evasive maneuvers. The external weapon creates drag that reduces speed. The unprotected fuel tanks guarantee that any hit will be fatal. One by one, the bombers explode and fall into the ocean. Not a single Betty bomber survives to reach release range. Not a single Oka weapon is launched against American ships. 137 bomber crew members and 15 Oka pilots die in the attack. The mission represents the ultimate expression of the Betty's fundamental flaw. An aircraft designed to deliver weapons to distant targets cannot survive to deliver those weapons when facing prepared opposition. The extraordinary range that makes the mission theoretically possible means nothing when the aircraft explodes before reaching weapon release range. The final mission flown by Betty bombers comes on August 19, 1945, 4 days after Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender. 2 white-painted G-4M bombers with green crosses depart Atsugi Airfield carrying Japanese representatives to discuss surrender terms with Allied forces. The aircraft, given call signs Bataan 1 and Bataan 2, fly to Aishima, where the Japanese delegation transfers to an American C-54 for transport to Manila. The symbolism is profound and deliberate. The white paint and green crosses indicate peaceful intent, transforming the bombers from weapons of war into vehicles of diplomacy. The call signs Bataan 1 and Bataan 2 reference the location where American forces surrendered to Japan in April 1942, one of the most devastating defeats in American military history. Now, 3 years later, aircraft bearing those call signs carry Japan's surrender delegation. Lieutenant Denjiro Sudo pilots one of the surrender aircraft, a G-6M Model 1 transport variant converted from the bomber airframe. The transport variants retain the Betty's distinctive cylindrical fuselage and wing configuration, but carry passengers and cargo rather than weapons. The crew wears dress uniforms rather than flight suits. The aircraft carry no weapons, no ammunition, no military equipment of any kind beyond what is necessary for flight. The flight from Atsugi to Aishima covers approximately 1,000 kilometers, well within the Betty's range, even in transport configuration. American fighters escort the white Betty bombers throughout their flight, ensuring they remain on the prescribed course. The escort is both protective and supervisory, guaranteeing safe passage while preventing any deviation from planned routes. The white Betty bombers with green crosses become the final image of the aircraft that had opened the Pacific War at Clark Field in December 1941. The circle is complete. The bomber that destroyed American air power in the Philippines in the war's first hours now carries Japan's surrender delegation in the war's final days. The aircraft that symbolized Japanese air power's reach and effectiveness now symbolizes Japan's defeat and submission to Allied terms. The Betty's production statistics reflect both the aircraft's importance to Japanese operations and the terrible cost of its design philosophy. Total production reaches approximately 2,414 aircraft across all variants, though some sources cite figures as high as 2,435 when including all prototypes and subtypes. The variation in total numbers reflects different methods of counting prototypes, subtypes, and transport variants. The G4M Model 1 comprises approximately 1,172 aircraft produced from 1941 through early 1943. This variant features the original unprotected fuel tank design with capacity of 4,780 liters. Top speed reaches 428 kilometers per hour. Maximum range of 6,034 kilometers makes it the longest-ranged bomber in service anywhere in the world. But the complete absence of protection systems makes it catastrophically vulnerable once American fighter strength increases. The G4M Model 2, with increased fuel capacity and slightly higher speed, accounts for approximately 1,142 examples produced from 1943 through 1945. This variant increases fuel capacity to 6,490 liters, extending maximum range even further. Top speed increases slightly to 437 kilometers per hour. But the Model 2 retains the fundamental vulnerability of unprotected fuel tanks. The modifications improve performance without addressing survivability. The G4M Model 3, designated Model 34, represents the only variant with actual self-sealing fuel tanks. Production begins in October 1944, but only 60 to 91 aircraft are completed by war's end, depending on source. The self-sealing tanks reduce fuel capacity to 4,490 liters to accommodate the leak-blocking material. Maximum range decreases to 3,640 kilometers, a loss of more than 2,000 kilometers compared to the Model 1. The modification comes too late and in too limited numbers to affect combat outcomes. The G6M transport variant, converted from bomber airframes, adds another 30 aircraft. These transport versions carry passengers and cargo rather than weapons, serving in liaison and communications roles. The G6M Model 1 used for one of the surrender aircraft in August 1945 represents this variant. Production continues through August 1945, with final aircraft completed just days before Japan's surrender. Mitsubishi factories produce Betty bombers at peak rates of approximately 100 aircraft per month during 1943. Production decreases in 1944 and 1945 as Allied bombing disrupts Japanese industry and as resources are diverted to fighter production for homeland defense. These production numbers make the Betty one of Japan's most numerous bombers, exceeded only by some fighter types in total production. Over 4 years of war, Mitsubishi delivers approximately 2,400 aircraft to Japanese Navy units across the Pacific Theater. The bombers serve in every major campaign, participate in every significant naval engagement, and strike targets across distances spanning thousands of kilometers. But production statistics tell only part of the story. Loss rates tell the rest. Few Betty bombers survive to war's end. The overwhelming majority are destroyed in combat, consumed by the fires that the unprotected fuel tanks made inevitable. By August 1945, when Japan surrenders, only a handful of operational Betty bombers remain in service. The aircraft that had numbered in hundreds in 1942 has been reduced to dozens by attrition that no amount of production can replace. The casualty statistics among Betty crews are similarly devastating, though exact numbers remain difficult to verify from available records. What is certain is that thousands of Japanese aircrew die in Betty bombers, their deaths made nearly inevitable by the aircraft's fundamental vulnerabilities. The unprotected fuel tanks create conditions where survival depends entirely on avoiding combat damage. Once hit, Betty bombers rarely survive. Once on fire, they never survive. The crews understand these odds and fly anyway because military discipline and cultural values demand that they accept the risks regardless of consequences. Surviving Betty crews are unanimous in their assessment. The aircraft's unprotected fuel tanks make survival a matter of pure chance. No amount of skill, no tactical innovation, no courage can compensate for the fundamental vulnerability built into every G4M. Former Flight Petty Officer Masa Yuito, who completes 28 combat missions before transfer to training duties, offers the most direct summary. The Betty was a magnificent aircraft that asked us to die for its range. We flew it because we were ordered to fly it. We died in it because that was what it was designed to make us do. The comparison with Allied bomber protection systems highlights the stark difference in design philosophy. The B-17 Flying Fortress features armor plating protecting pilot and co-pilot seats with steel plates ranging from 0.3 to 0.31 inches thick. Armored bulkheads protect crew positions throughout the fuselage. The bombardier position features armored glass. Waist gunner positions include protective shields. Self-sealing fuel tanks are standard from the B-17C model onward, introduced in 1941. The B-25 Mitchell incorporates similar comprehensive protection. Pilot and co-pilot seats feature armor backing. Fuel tanks include self-sealing compounds from early production. The B-25's empty weight of approximately 9,100 kilograms reflects the substantial weight penalty of protection systems, roughly 2,000 kilograms heavier than the Betty despite similar size and role. The weight penalty for Allied protection systems is substantial and accepted as necessary. American studies during the war demonstrate the effectiveness of crew protection measures with statistical precision. Body armor reduces thoracic wound fatalities from 36% to 8%, a reduction of more than 75% in deaths from chest wounds. Self-sealing fuel tanks reduce fire-related casualties by similar margins. Aircraft equipped with protected fuel systems show survival rates 3 to 4 times higher than unprotected aircraft when damaged in combat. Protected crew positions increase survival rates in damaged aircraft by providing shielding from shell fragments and small arms fire. Armored glass prevents pilot casualties from head-on attacks. Bulkheads compartmentalize the fuselage, preventing fire or damage in one section from spreading throughout the aircraft. The comprehensive approach to crew protection reflects American doctrine that trained crews represent assets more valuable than aircraft, which can be replaced more easily than experienced combat veterans. The weight cost for this protection exceeds 1,000 pounds in most American bombers. But American industrial capacity permits this weight penalty without sacrificing production numbers. American factories produce over 12,000 B-17 bombers and nearly 10,000 B-24 Liberators during the war. The production capacity means that American forces can field large numbers of protected bombers without compromising capability. Japanese doctrine reaches different conclusions. The Betty's design reflects a calculation that range and striking power outweigh crew survival. This philosophy assumes that achieving surprise and maintaining initiative will provide sufficient protection. It assumes that enemy opposition will remain limited. It assumes that the war will be short and decisive. All these assumptions prove catastrophically wrong. By mid-1942, American fighter strength increases to levels that make Betty interception routine. By late 1942, American pilots have learned to exploit every Betty vulnerability. By 1943, Betty formations suffer such devastating losses that missions become suicide operations. By 1944, Betty bombers can barely operate in daylight against American opposition. The mathematics of the Betty's war are written in fire and loss. Every advantage that makes the aircraft formidable in early 1942 becomes irrelevant once sustained combat begins. Range means nothing when bombers explode before reaching targets. Speed means nothing when fighters can intercept from distant bases. Payload means nothing when formations are destroyed before weapon release. The examination of tail number 763 at Clark Field in January 1945 reveals the complete story. The unprotected fuel tanks that shock Major McCoy aren't an oversight, not a temporary expedient, not a design failure. They're the deliberate choice of engineers who believed range mattered more than survival. Japanese designers created exactly what their specifications demanded: an aircraft with extraordinary range and speed, built with minimal weight, optimized for the mission requirements they received. The tanks are unprotected because protection would have prevented achieving the required performance. The decision makes perfect sense within the constraints of 1937 technology and 1937 assumptions about future warfare. But those assumptions collapse under the reality of sustained combat against an opponent with unlimited industrial capacity and growing technological advantage. The Betty bomber becomes a symbol of Japanese willingness to accept catastrophic casualties in pursuit of tactical advantage. It becomes evidence of a military culture that values mission accomplishment over crew survival. When American engineers examine the intact Betty at Clark Field, they're not just analyzing an enemy aircraft. They're witnessing the physical manifestation of choices made years earlier. Choices that prioritize capability over survival. Choices that will cost thousands of Japanese aircrew their lives. The unprotected fuel tanks aren't an accident. They're a decision. The Betty bomber serves from the first day of the Pacific War to the last. It sinks capital ships and devastates air bases. It ranges across distances no other bomber can match. But its ultimate legacy is written in lost statistics that exceed all projections. The aircraft that opens the war by destroying American air power at Clark Field ends the war carrying Japan's surrender delegation in white-painted aircraft marked with green crosses. The crew of tail number 760 Threatwelve abandoned their aircraft during the American advance on Clark Field. They survived by walking away from an aircraft whose design makes survival in combat nearly impossible. Most Betty crews are not so fortunate. They fly missions knowing the danger. They climb into unprotected bombers and cross vast Pacific distances, and they die in overwhelming numbers, consumed by fires that the aircraft's design makes inevitable. The Betty bomber's story is ultimately about the price of capability without protection. It demonstrates that performance alone cannot guarantee success when that performance is purchased at the cost of crew survival. The extraordinary range of 6,000 kilometers means nothing when aircraft cannot survive the final 100 kilometers to target. The impressive speed of 428 kilometers per hour provides no advantage when American fighters can intercept from distant bases with warning from radar systems. The payload capacity of 1 ton becomes irrelevant when formations are destroyed before weapon release. Most importantly, the Betty reveals that military technology divorced from realistic assessment of combat conditions produces weapons that kill their own crews as efficiently as they strike enemy targets. The assumptions underlying the Betty's design, assumptions about limited opposition and short warfare duration, prove catastrophically wrong within months of the Pacific War's start. By the time these assumptions are proven false, thousands of Betty bombers are already in service or production, and Japanese industry lacks the capacity to replace them with better protected designs. Japanese designers understand the risks when they make their choices in 1937 and 1938. They calculate the weight penalties. They know the vulnerabilities. They accept the trade-offs because they believe the performance advantages will prove decisive. They're wrong, and thousands of men pay the price for that miscalculation with their lives. The Betty's legacy extends beyond aviation history into fundamental questions about aircraft design philosophy, military ethics, acceptable risk, and the value of human life in warfare. American designers answer those questions by prioritizing protection even at the cost of performance. Japanese designers answer differently. The Betty bomber stands as evidence of what happens when capability is prioritized over survivability, when range is purchased with crew lives, when performance requirements override protection considerations. The thousands of burning Betty bombers across Pacific skies mark the consequences of that philosophical difference, revealing the fundamental difference between how different nations approach warfare in the Pacific. American forces design aircraft to bring crews home. Japanese forces design aircraft to reach targets regardless of cost. In the end, The nation that values crew survival builds an air force that can sustain operations indefinitely. The nation that accepts catastrophic casualties for performance advantages builds an air force that destroys itself through attrition. The examination of tail number 760 Threatwelve at Clark Field provides the final proof of what Allied forces have suspected for years. The Betty bomber is not poorly designed. It's brilliantly designed to achieve specific goals. Those goals simply don't include bringing Japanese crews home alive. And in that single fact lies the entire story of why Japan lost the Pacific War.